Serena de Messi. I'm a systemic coach working both in the Middle East and in Europe.
And I'm Alain Cardon. I'm French. I'm a master certified coach in the International Coach Federation. And I grew up in Egypt, and I am now in Europe and an international coach.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Alain, what is your perception of today's chaotic situation in the Middle East? Your systemic perception.
Systemic perception. There is systemic perception. It's interesting to consider in the Middle East that one of the most digital organizations, in other words, emerging, crowdsourced, network, without hierarchy in a way, completely distributed, using a lot of emerging and reactive strategies. It's completely unpredictable. So this could be considered a digital organization, and it is the definition of the Islamic State. Okay? In other words, it's a sort of non-local organization that doesn't respect any boundaries, that is spreading in a apparently chaotic way. In other words, what we call chaos could be completely in keeping with what we also call a digital organization, a startup, a high energy, multi-directional developing system. And we could say, if you look at it systemically all over the world, on the one hand, there is the internet type of perception of world change, where things are grassroots developments. We can even say Piazza del Sol and this and that. And then there's been different forms of Arab Spring revolutions that were within the boundaries. And then the next step is the same thing is happening on a much larger scale. The equivalent today in Europe could be the Greek phenomenon, which is still within a state, but it's starting to go beyond boundaries. So we could say in a systemic way, if we're looking at these two, well, there's what's happening in the light, and then there's the darker side of the force. But it's very important to understand that what is perceived as chaos in history is very often the beginning of a new type of order. And internet or internet thinking or digital thinking has been helping the development of a new kind of order. In other words, today we're talking about flat organizations, collaborative work, non-hierarchical systems, etc., crowdsourcing, the end of traditional organizations such as insurances and banks and so on, the end of centralization. This actually completely applies to what could be called the Middle Eastern chaos. It is frightening because the darker side of the force in the Middle East is as extreme as what could be seen in the more traditional states that were actually quite reactionary, or feudal systems in a way. So the polarity in the Middle East is much more extreme between the military states and the digital type of development. So probably, I think it's interesting to see this as a very difficult period, very frightening period. But actually, the criteria, the systemic dimension of that Middle Eastern change today is also worldwide. Yeah. And there's ways of understanding it if you go beyond value judgments, which is pretty hard actually, to understand what's going on, what's really going on, could help find some different types of solutions. But it is the beginning of a new creative development. We can say this is the beginning of creativity. So we could say probably the Middle East is also on the verge of a huge creative development.
Yes.
And that could concern a lot of people there.
Yes, it is very much perceived like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But creativity and survival.
And survival.
A lot of creativity rests on chaos and survival strategies in chaotic times.
Yes, survival strategies creates entrepreneurial situations, and people will benefit from this and use this emerging energy to create something.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Alain.
Thank you.